Welcome, Joanna.
Oh, thanks for having me, Susie. It's great to be here.
It's so lovely. I've watched your work for a while, and just to give the listeners a clue of what we're going to talk about, Joanna has a wonderful site that we'll talk about, which empowers authors and helps them to get writing, helps them to get creative, and not really have the blocks about going ahead to write whatever it is, whether it's we were just talking before we started about the difference between non-fiction and fiction, and in this call and conversation we're going to talk about writing in general, and it's different according to whether you write non-fiction or fiction. So we'll mainly be talking about non-fiction, but we'll also address the fact that it's different for fiction. We'll talk mainly about non-fiction because that's my area. I don't know. I have great admiration for people who write fiction because I wouldn't know where to start. Anyway, Joanna's our lady. She's going to point us in all the right directions for getting writing. And in lockdown, it couldn't be a better time, Joanna.
Oh, no, it's true. Although I would say that for the first few weeks of lockdown, I think we all went through, the stages of grief. Many people are calling it the stages of grief. This kind of, oh my goodness, there's the shock and the denial and eventually the acceptance. And I definitely felt the first few weeks were not that creative because you're constantly on the news apps, you are worrying a lot and you're changing your behavior. But then I think what happened is, and we're on I keep it in my diary here, we're on day 45 here in the UK of lockdown as we record this. And it was, I think, around day sort of 15, I was like, okay, I have to get on with my life.
Yeah.
I have to get back to my book. And when the lockdown happened, I was about 35,000 words into my latest novel, and then I had this hiatus, and then I was like, right, I have to get back to it. So by changing my creative routine, I mean, maybe we can talk about this, having a creative routine is really important, but when that gets sort of disrupted, you have to create a new one around your new situation. So I've been able to do that, and I'm just finishing the editing on the new book. But certainly the coronavirus has had a huge impact, and many people are writing more, but other people can't write because they're so distracted, and both are acceptable. There is no judgment either way.
Totally. Interesting, isn't it? Such interesting times. And I love the fact that you've touched on routines. I'm passionate about routines. I'm a coach as well as a writer. And when I coach people, I often go into the routines, and the new book I've written is about the habits and routines of highly creative people. So, I mean, what have you got to say about routines for being a creative writer?
Yeah, it's funny because we think, oh, creative, sort of la-di-da, we can just do what we like. But actually, you need to work like an accountant. There's a quote, I can't remember who said it, but it was like, you have to work like an accountant, which is you put in the hours, you have time of day when you write, and if you do it like a job, like I've been full-time for nearly a decade now, and you have to, even if you don't feel like it, you're writing. So the attitude towards routine is, yes, you're going to create something wonderful when you write, but you have to organize your life so that you can write. So for me, the routine for over a decade has been morning writing. So normally, now I'm full-time, I get up and I used to go to the local cafe, and now I just write at my desk. And before, when I had a day job for about 5 years before I left, I would get up at 5 a.m. again right before the day job. So I'm really much more creative in the morning. Other people are creative at night, or whenever you are. Again, no judgment. Do what you like when you like, but it's best, I feel, to do it at the same time every day, because that creates that habit. You get up, you do your work, and then you carry on. Then, so the timing is one, booking the time slot, turning up for the time. Then I use noise cancelling headphones, which are just amazing. So I use Bose Quiet Silence or something like that.
Oh my goodness, they're expensive, but that,
yes.
I mean, also for flights, they cut out all the noise. And in cafes, I love cafes too for writing. And I sit there and people come up and go, hi, but if you've got headphones on, you can't hear all the noise, but you have the advantage of being able to get coffee on tap and be out there, watching and listening to people.
Oh yeah, well that's what I normally do. I normally write in the cafe with the noise cancelling on, and they are quite big, right? You look a bit silly,
Yes.
but as you say, they're a couple of $100, but they are well worth it
Yeah.
because you can just get into your zone. And then I used to listen to Rain and Thunderstorms at the cafe,
Mhm.
and I've listened to the same album for a decade. And then when I had to move home because of the coronavirus, I started listening to the Game of Thrones soundtrack, the instrumental version, because I write thrillers, so that's
Yeah.
quite a
Oh, cool. That's
that's quite
fantastic.
a
What
good
a great
soundtrack.
idea to have music, because I write about how powerful music is to evoke states in us. And to get in a creative state, to have a soundtrack that mirrors what you're trying to write is genius. I think that's a wonderful idea.
Yeah,
And
it's funny.
yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, yeah, and I've used the Rain and Thunderstorms more as a sort of just white noise to tune out the cafe or whatever. But now I really found that by switching it up to the Game of Thrones track, it just brought a lot more drama to my book. So that is a good tip. And the instrumental versions, I just use, Spotify soundtracks is really great for film soundtracks to really get into the mood. And that, I think that helps us get into a routine and jump straight into the book. It's like, I'm sitting here at this time, and now I'm putting on my headphones, and now I'm into my book. And no excuses, no social media, no email, no nothing. You just do your work. And then the other thing is timed writing, I think, is really a secret weapon for many people.
And what
Set
is
a
that?
timer, 20 minutes, half an hour. Oh, we just set a timer
Mhm.
and say 20 minutes, for example, and I'm working for 20 minutes, and then the timer will go off. And sometimes I'm like, whoa, that went way too fast. And sometimes it feels like forever. But in that time, you're concentrating, and it helps people go for longer, because then you take that 5-minute break, for example, for those people working at a desk and might have difficult back pain, neck pain, will help you get up and have a stretch, and then 5 minutes break is up, sit back down, get back into the book. So that timed writing sort of periods can really help as well. So all of these things are structuring your creative time, so that when you sit down to do your work, your creative stuff is in the work, rather than like trying to organize your world.
Well, that's it. I mean, a lot of people, when they first start, they're clearing, and I myself included, clearing the clutter. I've got to have the kitchen cleaned. I've got to have everything sorted out. Then I can come up to my writing desk. And even then, I'm clearing paperwork off. What is the trick for being able to jump? You sound like a person who jumps straight in there. How do you do that?
Well, it really is. Well, I run my life. I've got my phone here. I run my life by Google Calendar. And that includes my personal life, as in just me. Managing me is the biggest issue. So if I have an appointment to write at 7:30 a.m., I treat that as if I'm meeting you. You and I met on time as agreed. I'm not going to not turn up because we had an agreement that we'd be here. So I treat my writing time the same. I'm turning up to be with the muse, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to call it. But I treat my writing time as just as important. In fact, all respect to you, Susie, but my writing time is more important than you. So if I get turn up for you, I need to turn up for my writing. Or if people listening, you turn up for the gym at a certain time, you turn up for a dentist appointment, you turn up for your kids' school event. So why wouldn't you turn up for your writing? So I would suggest to people is think about, and I just like to do it in how long the book is going to be. So, usually, let's say a 60,000 word thriller, I know that I need, in my first draft phase, I'm going to need a certain number of sessions where I'll write, say, 2,000 words. And I just plan those in my diary. And this morning I had an editing time for editing. I did 30 pages of editing. So I just turn up for that time. So that is the tip. It sounds so simple, and yet people just don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. I had my manuscript back from my editor for my new book, and I looked at how many pages was in this PDF that I had to check and go through, and I thought, okay, I've got a week to do it, so I divided that number by 7 or slightly more. I gave myself a free half a day free, and then I knew exactly how many pages I had to do in the allocated time. And then I know that I'm going to be able to finish it in a week, for example. And chunking work down like this, and also chunking it up. If you're trying to write a 60,000 word book, for example, you know, have a look at chunking that so that you can, you know, decide how much am I going to write. How much do people write a day? This is an interesting one. What's your view on that?
Well, it totally depends who they are, and also, I guess, how experienced they are. If you're just starting out, you can't sit down and say, I'm going to write 2,000 words today. That's like walking into a gym and trying to lift 100 kilos, you know, 100 kilo deadlift. You're not going to do that on day one. Writing is very much like a muscle. And so if you're just starting out, I would suggest doing that 20 minutes. So it's either time or it's number of words or number of pages. So maybe when you're starting out, just try the timing. So you say, okay, I've set aside 20 minutes. There's no goal for how many words I write, but for that 20 minutes, I'm going to work on my book. And also we have to remember that that time can also include plotting for fiction and planning and character development, or for non-fiction, it can include structuring and research. So there's these different phases of a book. So I certainly only do the word count in the short period that is first draft writing, whereas the majority of my time is actually spent in research and then in, you know, and then editing and then the production and all of the other things. So, you know, it only takes about 30, let's say 35 days total for me to write the first draft of a book, and then the rest of the time is around that. So there is no number. I mean, you know, classically, I think Stephen King says 2,000 words a day or 3,000 words a day. And, you know, those old school writers sometimes talk about pages, 2 pages a day or 4 pages a day, whereas those of us who work on computers don't think so much in pages. But it's, I don't want to put any pressure on anyone. You have to see what works for you. What I would say is having some kind of goal and even some kind of deadline. So for my first novel, for example, I said I want to have it written by my birthday a year on. So it took me about 14 months. So it wasn't my close birthday, it was the next birthday. And I did it a month after, so I just missed it. But having that goal really helped me focus and to get the work done. So you have to balance. And sorry,
a lot of people, I think the thought of a year-long project, unless it's building a house, is quite overwhelming for people. You know, a lot of people say, how long does it take you to write the book? I can't remember, is the first thing. I have no idea. But, you know, it does fit, you know, when people start saying, oh, I spent a year writing this or 2 years, that's a big deal for most people and slightly overwhelming.
Well, but most people don't spend a year writing the book or 10 years writing a book. It's very common with a first novel. It's like, oh, it took me 7 years or whatever. It doesn't take that long. You're thinking of things, and there's a lot of thinking involved in all our work. And then at some point you'll start working on it and noodling it. Memoir is a very good example. Memoir can take people a lifetime. You know, I know someone who wrote a draft 25 years ago and then revisited it again, and then just still wasn't ready, and then revisited it again. So our creative process is individual, and it's also going to depend on the book you're writing. So for example, one of my best-selling books is called How to Make a Living with Your Writing. It's only 27,000 words. It only took me about a month to, you know, get everything done, and that sells lots of copies. And other books I've written don't sell as well and took a lot longer. So that's the other thing. The value in the book for the reader is not necessarily based on how long it took you. So I think you just have to decide what your goals are, and that's the most important thing.
So if someone's wanting to write a book, and we talked about this fact there's different kind of genres, and we might want to just carve that up into different genres. If someone wants to write a book, say fiction, where do they start? How would you recommend they get started?
Well, I think we've kind of talked about that in terms of setting aside the time blocks. That would be my first thing, is make a plan to actually work on this. And then of course you have to decide what you're going to work on. And that can be a big deal for people, is really, well, what project? Talking about nonfiction, for example, so you've written a book on creativity. Creativity is such a huge topic. It could be a very different book if it's creativity for painters towards, you know, in visual art, than creativity for writers, for example, or creativity in business. is another completely different angle. So that would be the next stage, is what book are you writing? And then obviously for nonfiction particularly, there's the research process, which can be long. And so my last nonfiction book was called Audio for Authors, and I have probably spent a decade researching that book, because I've been podcasting for a decade. And it was only after that long that I was like, okay, I really have to put this together into something coherent. So deciding all those things, and then deciding on your definition of success is also really important. Maybe we'll talk about publishing, but for example, you have a publisher for your book, and the type of book you write that you pitch to a publisher might be quite different to the type of book you write if you already have an audience and you're selling directly to them, as I do. Audio for Authors was written for my audience, and so I put it out there and they bought it. And so there's quite different approach depending on where you're going to go. So those are some things to think about when you get started.
And what are the pros and cons of people at the moment of working out whether they'd rather go traditional, or would they like to do their own book and format it and be in charge of the destiny of the book? Could you just go through and sort of describe the pros and cons of both routes, traditional and doing it yourself?
Sure. And what I would say is there is no true end-to-end dichotomy anymore, because many people do both, even on the same book. So for example, I independently publish my books in English, but I have foreign rights deals with, South Korea, France, Germany, other places. So that's one important point. It's a kind of mix and match now. Also, that traditional publishing is a scale and independent publishing is a scale. So there are many options along the way. So, from the classic, you send a book to an agent sells it, you get an advance, and they own the book basically for the life of copyright, through to smaller companies who might do an ebook only and still pay you royalties, through to companies who will help you self-publish, through to people like me who basically run their own publishing house and work with contractors, stuff like that. So in terms of the pros and cons, again, it comes down to what do you want to achieve. So with nonfiction particularly, it might be, okay, I want to be a 7-figure speaker. Let's take that goal, which many nonfiction people want, to earn big money with professional speaking. It may be best for you to try and get a book deal with a well-known traditional publisher for your genre that is respected amongst conference organizers. That might be a reason to get a traditional publisher in that area. Or if you're a podcaster who already has a massive audience, then self-publishing might be the better way, because you're going to make good income and you don't care about the speaking platform, for example. So in terms of the pros and cons, that's the first thing, is what's your definition of success and what are you trying to achieve? Then it's things like, do I care about validation? If you want a review in The Guardian, for example, a UK paper, then you probably need to be traditionally published. They're still not that open to independent books. Or do you want to make really good money with your books, in which case, going independent might be the best way. But then I would say, as an independent, you have control, you have speed. I mean, I spoke to someone the other day who said their book was coming out in 2022, and we're recording this in May 2020. And I was like, oh my goodness, I could not cope with that. I just couldn't wait that long.
Yeah, it's a long lead time. Mine's at least 2 years since it was commissioned.
Yes, well, there's a good example. Yeah, in 2 years, I've written maybe 8 or 9 books. So I've totally forgotten the one I wrote 2 years ago. I mean, we move on. So that's a big thing. Speed and control is why a lot of traditionally published authors are actually going independent now, because they realize that they can do a lot themselves. But you do need to be a project manager. You do need to learn the skills that are involved in publishing. To be honest, publishing is not that difficult. It's the marketing that's difficult, and we have to do that anyway, as you know. As even if you're traditionally published, you'll probably have to do your own marketing. So
and more so now. I mean, my publishers, they've had to let some of their marketing department go, sadly, as happening in a lot of businesses. So then it's back over to the author. You've got to construct your own template for how to go out there and how to market your book. Even if, I mean, the traditional publishers, of course, they have the distribution, they have contacts with the bookstores and so on and so on, but we all know we're living in a very much more of a digital world now, more than ever.
Yes, and that's a good point. And again, this is, what do you care about? So do you care about having 10 copies in your local bookstore, or would you rather sell globally? So I've sold books in 143 countries at this point, which is far more than most traditionally published authors ever will, because their books are not available in those countries. So, and of course, as an independent, you still have print, but I have print books, I have hardbacks, I have audiobooks and ebooks and all of that. So digital doesn't just mean ebook. Digital now means print on demand. So you can order all my books in print, and you can order them on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or whatever independent bookstore, or your physical bookstore can order them in. So there's the distribution side is really about how much do you want to have that 3 weeks where your book is in a physical bookstore, and many publishers won't even guarantee that these days anyway. Certainly we don't know what it's going to look like post COVID. But yes, so some of the benefits obviously of traditional publishing is you don't have to learn any of those skills. You can just hand it over, but remember, you are handing over the larger chunk of your royalties as well. So I make 70% on ebooks. I can make 90% selling direct, which I do from my own website, and I make around $2 to $3 per print book, whereas most authors will make 20 cents per print book, around that, maybe 50 cents. But yeah, so
I think people are realizing that things have changed with the kudos of being traditionally published, which was always considered to be a very powerful calling card, you know, if you were traditionally published, whereas now the channels have opened up so dramatically, and the income has so much more potential, without having to pay all the fees of everyone, the agents and the publishers and all of these people along the pipeline who take their own commissions, and leaving the author with very little. Actually, you know, you have to sell a heap load of books to make a lot of money as a published author. Maybe if
as
you
a traditionally published
author, whereas if you have books out for yourself and you've built your own platform, then you are the master of your own destiny in that sense. So would you recommend, if someone's wanting to write their first book and get support, do you recommend that people join writers groups and forums and things with some support? What do you recommend?
Yeah, it's whatever works for you as a personality type. I've never been that type of person. I think independence, you know, if you cut me open, it says independent. You know, I've always been an independent. I much prefer to pay professionals to help me. So I've always used professional editors, sometimes multiple editors per book, many of whom have come out of traditional publishing because they've been laid off. But in terms of what people need, if you are someone who really wants a writing group, and many writers find that useful, then I would suggest you find a writing group per genre. So the worst experiences that people have in writing groups is, for example, if they really love romance and then they go to a literary fiction writing group and they're basically told their writing is terrible because those people in the group don't enjoy that genre. So that would be a really important tip. Please identify the genre you're writing in and then go find a writing group who appreciate that type of thing, which is, you know, can be physical in a world post-corona, but also online can be really good. So I am a member of the Alliance of Independent Authors, for example. I'm also a member of thriller writers, international thriller writers, horror writers association. So those, and some crime groups as well. So those are the genres I'm involved with, and I network with other authors and I read books in those genres. And it would be the same if you're going to find a group. Just make sure those are people who love the genre, and you're going to get much better comments and feedback from those people than from a sort of general writing group, unless you're going to a writing group just for networking. And of course, many writers are introverts, myself included, and you know, sometimes meeting people in person can be great. So yeah, there are definitely pros and cons of writing groups, but it really depends on what you need personally as a writer.
And how did you know that you were a writer? Did you know since you were young, or was it something that you developed?
Oh yeah, in fact, on the video you can just see down there I've got about 50 journals. I mean, I've been journaling, you know, since my angsty teens, and the earliest pictures of me, I reading, you know, I used to drag books around instead of teddies.
Yeah.
I think if you're a reader, you know, that we all have a default mode of expression, and mine has always been, I guess, reading for words, the words of things. And even if I'm in a gallery, an art gallery, I will often read the text before I even look at the picture. I'm attracted to the words,
Yeah.
and the words used to describe the picture, which is a really odd behavior. But I think we all have these default modes, and yeah, mine is certainly writing.
So I remember I called myself a writer way before I had a book deal or I had any books done or in the pipeline. I just felt like one. I had a PR agency. I was writing a lot for my day job. I was having to write press releases very, very fast for news. And I found that I could write. And I remember my first job in a PR agency, I got hauled in by the boss and he said, you know, you just joined, haven't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, did you write this press release? I went, yeah. And he said, it's not very good. It's really not very well written. I was like, oh. And I was, you know, I had to learn my craft. You know, I didn't arrive as a writer. I had to really, really work and do a lot of writing, do a lot of writing, do a lot of writing. And now I'm a much better writer than I was years before. So I think one of the things that people can think about is really showing up to the craft. One thing I wanted to ask you, what software do you like working in?
I write in Scrivener. I've
Ah,
written like 32 books in Scrivener now. I would find it very hard to write without it. It's because it's got drag and drop functionality. It's really easy to write. I don't really write in order. Certainly for nonfiction, I never write in order. And you can just drag and drop things around. And my novels, for example, even this morning, I was drag and dropping scenes around, and it just makes it so much easier. And yeah, Scrivener is brilliant. It's only $49 US, which is, and I've used it for like over a decade. So it is magical. But just to circle back on the learning the craft, I think that's really important. And one of the reasons that people struggle is that they think they've read so many books they can just sit down and write a book. Whereas you do actually have to learn these things over time, and that's another reason to write a lot of books. I think being prolific is one of the most important things if you want to do this for a lifetime, is just write more books. Because with every book, I mean, you try your best with every book, right? You, like you did with your press releases, you try your best and then you learn something and then you apply that next time, and then you learn something and then you apply that next time. And one of the great things about being an independent is you can just upload a new version as you learn things, which really helps.
yeah. And you can rewrite pieces that you weren't happy with and so on.
And put out new editions whenever you like. So, you know, I put out different editions regularly, or just, you know, update back matter and all of that type of thing. Yeah. So I think that active management, when you're a full-time author with a lot of books, is managing your intellectual property assets. Yeah. So it goes from that creative side to that business side, which I also love. I think if you love both sides, you can definitely do this for a career.
And what about making money as a writer? You've done a book on this. What are your, say, you know, 3 tips for people to earn money?
What I just said, write a lot of books, is probably the #1 tip, because you cannot make a living with one book. You absolutely can't, unless as a non-fiction author, for example, you take that one book and you turn it into a speaking career and online courses and coaching and consulting. So actually your income is not from the book, your book is marketing for your business. So that is an absolutely valid business model. But I'd say then you're making money as a speaker, for example. If you want to make a living with your writing, it is putting out books regularly. It's learning book marketing, which is quite different to other forms of marketing. You know, getting to grips with things like Amazon advertising and BookBub advertising, and I was just doing that this afternoon, in order to actually sell your books. Things like email marketing, so you can reach your readers. So you have to learn the craft of writing, but you also have to learn the business side. And in that way, you can definitely make money as a writer. You can even make a full-time living as a fiction author doing this, but you have to really want to do it and then apply yourself to creating intellectual property, licensing it, and bringing in the money that way.
And what about using an agent, a literary agent? What do you think about that?
I don't have an agent, so I can't really comment on that, but I certainly run a multi-six-figure business and sell it all over the world, and I don't have an agent. So I think some people love their agents, other people have a difficult time with agents. So yeah, I guess I can't really comment on it. I wouldn't say no to working with an agent if there was someone who was an entrepreneur and had the same kind of attitude as I did. But basically everyone's running their own business, and an agent is running their business, and you are not their only client. So I feel like I'm the best agent for my business
I
at
think
this point.
That sounds so accurate and spot on. That, as writers, we have to really embrace, if we want to be so-called successful writers, we have to get behind the understanding of marketing and the business itself and how to do that. I know you do a lot of courses so if writers are interested in learning about marketing, you do specific bespoke courses around that, don't you?
I have not so many on marketing, to be honest. I work with a lot of affiliate partners for marketing. I do have a book called How to Market a Book.
Yeah, I remember saying that.
Yeah, but what I find is that marketing changes so quickly. So I work with another friend of mine, Mark Dawson, who does courses on Amazon ads, Facebook ads and stuff, because the platforms change all the time and I cannot be bothered, recording screens that change every 5 minutes. Yeah. So I think this is another thing, is you can create your network of other business people to work with in order to help other people. But yeah, for sure, I have my fiction brand, which is JF Penn. And then I have Joanna Penn, which is my non-fiction business, which is essentially talking about what I learn along the way.
Amazing. So how do people get hold of you, Joanna? Where do they find you? And can you just mention your website and how people connect with you?
Sure. Well, presumably people like podcasts or YouTube if they're watching this, and I have the Creative Penn podcast and the Creative Penn on YouTube, and I also have a second podcast called Books and Travel, which is about what it says, and generally, and then my website's thecreativepenn.com, and Twitter @thecreativepenn if anyone has any questions.
Fantastic. So if you want to get in touch with Joanna, reach out to her on her site. And mentioned where you heard her speak or saw her speak, and do get in touch. It would be lovely for us to create a bigger world of great writers. The world one of the things we've learned with this crazy situation we have out there is that human beings, one, they need social interaction and to engage with other humans, and B, they reach for creativity and writing and all these different things when these crises happen. Many people have started writing and getting creative or picking up the paint pots or whatever your thing is. It's a great thing to experience when the world is going a little crazy. And I think writing is such a great outlet. And you were saying about all your journals that are behind you there. Journaling is one of the finest ways to really get out where you are, how you feel, and unblock your blocks. I think it's a great way to unravel blocks for writers.
For sure. But yes, you're right. It is a fantastic time. And I know it's not a fantastic time with coronavirus, but in terms of having the internet, I was saying to my husband the other day, having the internet means that my business actually is more effective than ever in this time. And that is just brilliant. So we are living in the best time in history to be writers and to be creatives and to be able to reach people all over the world. So yes, definitely. If you're listening and you want to write, please go ahead. We all need more books in the world. We need your book in the world. So yes, please go ahead.
And everyone has something important to say. That's the other thing.
Definitely.
Yes, I think we all have unique stories. Not one of us has the same story to tell. And the world loves storytelling and loves to hear stories. So let's all get writing and get out there and banish whatever blocks you think you might have and just get on and start writing. And if you want to know specifically more about getting books together, then really just have a look at Joanna's site, get in touch and get involved. And let's get some more books out there. Joanna, I can't thank you enough. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and hear your wisdom around book writing, which is my absolute passion. So
thanks for having me, Susie. That was great.
Thank you for spending some time with us. All right. Bye for now. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Joanna.